This episode includes references to narcotics and drug use and may not be suitable for all listeners. Please use discretion when enjoying this interview. What does an Egyptian mummy smell like? What kind of scent did the ancients find pleasant? And what kind of stimulants did they use to make their life a bit more pleasurable? My guest today is Dora Goldsmith. Dora is a PhD researcher at the Freie University in Berlin, Germany. She specializes in ancient smellscapes, studying how the ancient Egyptians perceived and described the scent of their world. In this interview, Dora introduces us to the favoured perfumes and flowers used by the Egyptians, especially during the New Kingdom. We also talk about some of their recreational substances and how the mummified bodies actually smell. It's a delightful conversation, tackling aspects of ancient society and life that I don't usually cover in the podcast. Smell is not my particular forte, so it's fascinating to learn more. Please welcome Dora Goldsmith. So, good morning, Dora Goldsmith. Welcome to the History of Egypt podcast. How are you today?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing well.
I say good morning, but it's actually good afternoon. You're currently in Berlin, is that correct?
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And you're undertaking your PhD studies in Berlin. So, for the audience, what are you working on right now?
I'm currently writing my PhD, so that's going to be published as a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just writing everything up chapter by chapter.
Fair
So,
enough.
yeah.
How are you feeling about it? Are you on a good roll, or is it in that sort of that crunch phase?
Oh, no, I mean, I love writing. It's a very difficult activity because it requires a lot of concentration. It's a high level of concentration, but it is so rewarding to see your work on a piece of paper. So it's a slow process, but I love it. I really like writing.
Excellent. So you're currently working, or you have published a number of articles, and your PhD thesis, as I understand it, is working on the history and the records of smell in
Right.
ancient Egypt. Now, to the casual audience, that might sound like a strange topic for historical research, because surely smells, they're kind of temporary. They come and go. They come into your nose. You react, however, as according, and then it's gone. So, at a very basic level, how does a scholar study smell in history, in the ancient world or general history?
So there's two ways of doing it. You can approach it by analyzing the written sources,
Mhm.
and you can also study the archaeology and see what is left that could indicate smell. So I concentrate on the written sources. And the advantage there is that the recording, so to say, is still there. So the smell has not evaporated, but it's recorded forever, right? So, what the written sources tell you is how the ancient Egyptians perceived the sense of smell. So, it gives you access into their viewpoint and their cultural values around scent. So, that is very significant. And you can sometimes also combine it with the archaeology, and then you have a full picture. But what I really like about my research is that I can look into the ancient Egyptians' head. I can look into their minds and see how they perceive the world through scent.
So, one thing that sort of comes to mind to me as you're discussing that is, especially in the New Kingdom, in tomb art. I know you work on text, but tomb art is obviously connected to it. During the 18th dynasty, especially, we often see people in tombs, during a funerary banquet or receiving offerings, holding a lotus flower to their noses. The first question that comes to mind there is, what is the particular significance of smelling the lotus flower as opposed to any nice smelling flower?
Right. So they called it Lotus to the nose. They have actually an expression for that. Lotus to the nose. So they're holding a lotus to their nose to signify a very important moment in time. And if you look at all the written sources and then you compare them with the art, with the two-dimensional depictions, then you see that they really match up very nicely. So, in the ancient Egyptian written sources, what you read about is that the lotus, the nose, is an expression that is being mentioned in the context of festivals, special moments, celebrations, and also kind of like a little bit of high life. So when everything is going well, there is ma'at in Egypt, there is peace, there's order, then there's also abundance, then there's blue lotus everywhere. So for example, there is a letter called Concerning the Wonders of Memphis. It's a letter where one woman is writing to another woman, and she's visiting Memphis and she's reporting about like what she can see in the city, what is going on in Memphis. She's reporting back. And then she says, there's lotus flowers everywhere. And she describes the city in this wonderful state where everything is prosperous and people have everything they want to have. This city is in a great state and everyone's rich and everyone's happy. And in this state, there's lotus flowers everywhere. There's lotus flowers in the ponds. There is lotus flowers in everyone's private lakes. And then they have flowers on their heads and they hold the flower to their noses. So it also has to do with kind of this idea of a rich life and peace and prosperity and happiness. There's also a hymn to the Nile where the Nile is being described and the different behaviors of the Nile and the way the inundation is and if it's too low then there's a problem because there's not enough crops. If it's too high then everything gets flooded. That's bad. So the inundation has to be just exactly right. It has to be perfect, right? And when it is perfect, there's lotus everywhere, right? So it is related to Egypt being at peace. It is related to celebrations. And you see it in the tombs because they want to see themselves in a perfect afterlife. Afterlife is the perfect life, right? Everything is the way it needs to be. So, of course, they're smelling lotus flowers in the afterlife. That's what they're doing. So that's why you see it. Sometimes you see the flowers, sometimes you see the buds. And it's also very important to look at the temple inscriptions when you really want to understand the significance of the lotus flower. Then you really need to look at how it is being offered in the temple cult. So they offer lotus flowers daily to each god in every temple. And what stands out is that the lotus bud is quite significant there because the lotus flower, and specifically the bud, is a symbol of the creation of life, right? So there is a myth where the world is created from a lotus flower. And the bud symbolizes that creation, that start of a new life. So they offer lotus buds and lotus flowers in the temple on a daily basis, and it's always the blue lotus that they offer because the blue lotus is the one that was a symbol of life.
Okay. And I guess the corollary to that is, do they in funerary texts or books of the dead, temple inscriptions, are there any other flowers or scents, except we'll leave out incense because that's obviously everywhere, any other flowers or scents that they particularly emphasize as being pleasant and nice in a religious funerary daily life context?
Flowers, you're asking about flowers specifically. Okay,
Mm.
so probably I should mention also that lilies were also, they could be interchangeable with lotus flowers. They're quite the same for them. This is the same. So sometimes you don't know if it's the blue lotus or if it's a lily, but they also had this symbol of regeneration. And actually, talk about a Book of the Dead. There is a spell in the Book of the Dead that is all about the lotus flower. It says becoming a lotus flower. So the deceased wants to become a lotus flower in afterlife because it's a symbol of regeneration, right? So it's a symbol of new life. So lotus lilies. So the lotus flower is the one that is mentioned a lot in the written sources. I mean, you know that there were other flowers that the Egyptians used, but their names are not that prominent. They're not very often mentioned, or sometimes they're not mentioned at all. So we don't know their names, but we know that they were around, right? Like we know that the Egyptians had narcissus, they had henna flowers, they had safflower, they had cornflowers. We don't really know all of these names in Egyptian. The one that really stands out is obviously the lotus flower. They were obsessed with it. I think that we can say that. I don't know if you want me to go there, but maybe I should probably say that the lotus flower was not a drug, because that's something that comes up a lot in Egyptology. Should I elaborate on that?
I was going to ask about that, that it sort of it crops up now and again, especially sort of online. This,
All
we'll
the
call it
time.
a hypothesis at best, that there may have been a mild narcotic or stimulant component.
This comes up all the time. So there is actually no evidence for this from an ancient Egyptian perspective. So I'm not even going to say if there is chemical evidence of that or not, because there isn't. But people they want to believe, right? They want to believe that the lotus flowers were used as drugs, so they don't really care if there was a chemical component to it or not. They like the idea. But I like to answer this question from an ancient Egyptian perspective. Okay, so why don't we look at the written sources and see if there's any evidence of them mentioning the lotus flower as a drug, and they never do. And they have a lot of words for intoxication. So the word for it is tech in Egyptian. There's such a thing as a tehu plant, which is an intoxicating plant. And then they describe intoxication during festivals. So there's such a thing as a festival of intoxication when everyone gets drunk to a point where they can't tell one from the other. So we know that they drank a lot of beer on these festivals. They're called the Festival of Intoxication. But there is no evidence of the lotus flower being used in such a manner. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that they're not people would shy away from the topic of intoxication and describing it in the sources, but they never do when it comes to the lotus flowers. So they describe even eating the lotus flower. So they describe the lotus flower in all sorts of different contexts, but they never mention getting high on it. Um, so there is no evidence from the ancient Egyptian written sources for the Egyptians using the lotus flower in such a
Okay.
way.
I know somebody's going to ask, so I'm going to ask the
Okay.
obvious.
Cool.
Are there any other recreational plants that they might be using for drugs? Any evidence for
Oh
it?
yeah, opium,
Opium?
opium, for
Mhm.
sure. Yeah,
Does that
yeah.
appear in, is it temple, funerary? Is it archaeological? What's the evidence for the use of opium? Just generally.
There's definitely evidence of it from the Roman source. I mean, there was like a huge opium field in Roman times in ancient Egypt. So that is, that is proven. But there is a plant, an intoxicating plant that can be very well identified with opium poppies. So it seems that they had access to opium as early as the 18th
Mhm.
dynasty.
Fair enough. I'm just
If you
curious.
want to talk about if you want to talk about drugs and stuff like that and perfumery, then there is a recipe for a perfume drink of Hathor, which I have also reconstructed. It's very interesting. So it's somewhere in between perfumery and cocktail making. So there's
Okay.
so-called Festival of Intoxication that I talked about earlier, and there is a hymn to go with it. So this text is officially a hymn, but there is a recipe embedded within the hymn, and you
Can I
can.
briefly interject just to clarify what is the date of these texts that we're talking about right here?
So it's Ptolemaic.
Okay.
This text that I'm talking about, it's called the Menu Song. So it is only recorded in the Ptolemaic period, but it's very clear that it goes back to the New Kingdom.
Mhm.
Right, so its origins are going to be from the New Kingdom,
Mhm.
and in this hymn there are traces of a recipe. So it's formally a hymn, but it gives you instructions how to make this perfume drink, and it's
Okay.
very exciting. And it's a very strongly um, perfumed, scented alcoholic drink.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Interesting.
And they do
Strongly
uh,
perfumed alcoholic
yes,
drink.
it's
So
somewhere in between perfumery and cocktail making.
fascinating. Having discussed the physical aspects of scent, the flowers that they're using, and some of the side effects they might enjoy, it's now time to explore the world of smell within ancient Egypt, including mummies, but also kings and gods. How did the Egyptians perceive these beings in terms of smell? Well, that's a really interesting idea. I've never thought of, like, obviously a nice cocktail today can have quite a nice scent depending on what's in it,
Right.
and plenty of those drinks will give you a very nice feeling if you consume enough of them. But that religious component of the scent and the drunkenness that is, at least in this case, connected so strongly with Hathor, that kind of dovetails with one of the major concepts of the divine world itself, including the king, who is part of that world, even if he's on Earth. And this is something that you have explored in your publications. To put it simply, what do the gods and the king smell like, ideally?
Okay, yeah. So the gods have what they call a divine scent. There's three different expressions for it. So there's Sechi nature, Chenemu nature, and Idet nature. So all of them mean the same thing, divine scent. But there's a little bit of a difference between them. So they're kind of like one expression is more intense than the other. And when we get to the last one, it's kind of like sweat coming out of their body.
Mhm.
And that is the most pleasant perfume in the world because it came out of the divine body.
Okay.
So essentially, the scent, the perfumes that you put back on the bodies of the gods in the temples every single day, that's what they sweat out. You
Mm.
just, that you put it back on, kind of, you're restoring their scent because what comes out of them is the most wonderful scent there is. And then what that actually smells like, that is sometimes explained.
Okay.
So there are three options. It's either myrrh, it's either frankincense, or it's lotus. So sometimes they explain, but most likely they don't. So it's very
Mm.
rare that it's explained. But when they go into detail in some of these temple texts, and they would say, "Oh, and that is it's the lotus. It's the scent of Hathor that comes out of her body. It's the lotus. It's the myrrh. It's this that." But more often, you're just going to say the divine scent. That's what you're going to read in the inscription. Now, as far as the king goes, that is interesting because the king is somewhere in between the divine world and then the human world. He is human, but is also divine at the same time, or at least he's divine because the office is divine. Maybe not the person, but the office is definitely a divine one. And he's a mediator in between the world of the gods and the world of the living. So he's somewhere in between. So um, it's a difficult question because some kings they said that they smell divine, others did not. So some kings really went into a whole other level and they declared that they smell divine. And Hatshepsut was great on that. So she liked to emphasize her divine body scent or body odor. And because that gave her legitimization for her rule. So she came from the gods. Because she came from Amun, Lord of the gods, she was the daughter, and she was also the daughter of Hathor, the mother goddess. She automatically had a divine body scent, right? So she inherited from her parents this divine scent. And she emphasizes this all the time in the written sources. Now, Ramses II did that as well, and Amenhotep III. So those three monarchs, they really like to emphasize how divine their smell. And if you look at their personalities, they also like themselves a lot, right? So
I'm going to say, of course, Amenhotep III went on about that.
exactly.
Of course he did.
And also Ramses II, we're not surprised, right? So what's interesting is that those two men actually looked up to a woman Hatshepsut was the example. She was a role model for that for later on for kings, right? So she set the example on how to emphasize your great ruler ship or kingship or like your power. So that she set a great example for that through the sense of smell. So the sense of smell was used as a power tool to remain in power, to enhance your power, and in some texts, it says that the king has a wonderful scent, and he smells of myrrh or frankincense or lotus. So those are the three main ones, and they really have the greatest value as far as olfactory values go. So those are the three scents that you can choose as highest value in ancient Egyptian society, right? So that is why those are used to describe the body of the gods and the body of the king and how they smell.
Okay, so we have the iconographic evidence of the use of the lotus flower, the use of various plants. We have the textual references, especially to the divine world. But for the general public, there is one more little topic that is kind of trickles appears now and again in popular imagery of ancient Egypt, and which many people are rightly curious about. And that is the wax cones that appear on the top of people's heads, primarily within tomb art. So the first question is, in your understanding of the written and the visual material, what are these cones supposed to do? What are they there for?
Right. So there's a lot of evidence for it in two-dimensional depictions. And it's very clear that they use them on special occasions, during banquets, for example, when they're celebrating, or when an official receives a gold of honor, for example. You see that at Amarna, or they go, on an important place. We see one of the officials on a chariot, riding in a chariot, wearing an unguent cone, probably is going somewhere important. You see a deceased couple playing Senet, the game, Senet game, the board game, right? They're in afterlife. They're playing this board game, Senet, and they're wearing unguent cones. Right? You see them worshiping the gods. They're wearing unguent cones. You see that a lot in banquets. Like you see them sitting at a banquet, for example, the tomb of Nebamun. You see all these ladies beautifully dressed, smelling lotus flowers, and each and every one of them is wearing an unguent cone. So um, you also see sometimes in funerary stela the couple, but maybe both a man and a woman, or just a woman, just a man, is wearing an unguent cone while they're receiving a food of offering from their sons and daughters. So it seems that the unguent cone was used to signify special moments with its scent. And then also you see in some of the stela, you'll see a zigzag coming out of the cone, which shows that the scent is coming out. That's a visual clue that there's a scent there. So it's a smelly scene. That's how they show it to you, right? And probably they're wearing it because it's not something that evaporates very fast. So we know now, based on archaeological finds from Amarna, that the base was made out of wax, right? Beeswax. So beeswax does not melt. It has a very high melting point. It melts at 60 degrees Celsius, which means that it's something you can carry around without melting, and the scent will always be there. So it's almost like a scented candle. Imagine wearing a scented candle on your head, right? And I reconstructed these cones for the first time around, like, I think 5 years ago. And I still have that cone, and it still smells very strong after 5 years when I open the box.
You mean you physically made one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What ingredients, apart from the beeswax, what were the main ingredients? Were there perfumes in it, or what were there?
So I kind of had to guess because Based on these finds in Amarna, we don't know. They did not do a chemical analysis. They only checked the base material and found that it was made out of beeswax. And then they found that the inside of it was linen. They used linen strips to, I guess, maybe
Hmm.
not use so much beeswax because beeswax was probably valuable. So they used linen strips as a filling material. What was very clear to me is that they use a lot of myrrh because there is this expression quite often, myrrh on the head, myrrh on the head. You wear on festivities, celebrations. So, and then you see the unguent cone being colored kind of red on the top on many depictions. So it seems that that is myrrh. Seems very clear. Now, regarding other scents, it was probably full of flowers because you also see the lotus flowers. So it could have been floral. They could have steeped flowers in it, or they could have used chips of wood, which they use in perfumery a lot, other resins. Yeah, I guess just all the perfume ingredients they would have used, they could have also just put them in the cones and then it would have smelled very strong. Myrrh is very likely to me. And based on the lotus flower being pierced or attached to it quite often, I would think that they use a lot of flowers in there too.
Okay. And the final question there is, most of the images that we have for these cones come from tombs or funerary stelae. Do they show up in temples? Are they? Is there strong evidence that they're using them in daily life, or is it just a funerary motif?
It's something for both. So it's for the living and for the dead. But what is interesting that you barely see anyone from the royal family wearing it. So there's one representation from the time of Tutankhamun. His wife, half sister Ankhesenamun, is wearing a very elaborate unguent cone. But besides that, it's very rare to see anyone from the family of the king wearing an unguent cone. So it's more for the rest of society. And again, festivities and banquets, that would be something for the living. Could be also, of course, a funerary banquet. But it's definitely clear that the living wore it on special occasions. And then, of course, there's a funerary aspect to it where the deceased couple or the deceased in general, man or woman, is wearing it all the time on special occasions in the afterlife. But of course, everything is special in the afterlife. So there is this afterlife aspect to it for sure, but it was also for the living on special occasions. I haven't seen any evidence for it from the temple.
Mm,
No, none of that. And again, none of that for the king.
mm.
The king is always special, right? So the
It
king,
smells nice already. He doesn't
yeah,
need
yeah,
the
he
tool,
doesn't
right?
exactly. He doesn't need it. He doesn't
Yeah,
need it.
I
What's
understand.
interesting about angiotones, and not a lot of people know, by the way, is that they're a very accurate dating tool. So the shape changes a lot. It shows up for the first time in the 18th dynasty, very beginning of the 18th dynasty. You never see it before, right? It's also interesting, why did they start using it in the 18th dynasty? Where does it come from? No one knows. But it's not a thing before the 18th dynasty, right? And then from that point on, the shape changes a lot. So the very beginning of the 18th dynasty, it's very small and flat, and then it starts growing in shape. And by the end of the 18th dynasty, it becomes quite tall. And then in the 19th dynasty, there's kind of like a platform, little base for it. So it's very typical for the 19th dynasty. And there's like a little something spears on it at the bottom, then you can identify it right away. Ramesside cone. The Amarna period also has a special shape to it. So I can date a scene into a certain, even like not even a certain sometimes I can date it to a certain king based on the shape of the codes. It's a very accurate dating tool. And then in the late period, it becomes tripartite. It's in three different parts. And yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Not a lot of people know that even in Egyptology. You can date a scene with the shape of the cone.
Okay. Are you willing to speculate on why it changes? Is it purely fashion, or are there deeper reasons for it?
I think it's like a fashion thing. I
Mm,
think as fashion changes, that changes as
mm.
well. Yeah.
Okay.
I would
Fascinating.
guess, we don't know, right? But
Sure. Yeah.
that would be my guess.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So recently there was a study about the smell of mummies, and that was published, and it sort of made headlines among the flurry of other things that have made headlines recently. But as somebody who specializes in olfactory experiences, what does a mummy smell like across time and bearing in mind different periods?
Mummies smell a little bit like decayed wood, like a little bit like a decaying forest. So I can detect all of those resins and all of those barks that I already know from embalming or perfumery, but I can tell that it's a little changed. There is this undertone to it of something a little old, or it smells a little bit like wet furniture, like old
Musty is the word that comes to
mu-
mind for me.
yeah, a little bit. Like another important point is that mummification is something that radically changed throughout the period. So you really need to know what you're smelling, what period it is, because, for example, a mummy from the New Kingdom that is properly mummified can smell fantastic. I mean, it really smells. I will just say it might sound odd, but they smell yummy. Like they smell really, really. They smell like appetite inducing, right? They smell amazing. But if you smell a mummy from third intermediate period, like starting sometime around that, and like then late period, especially Greek Roman period, it's gonna smell really bad.
Mm.
Especially the ones from the Greek Roman period. Like they start stinking really badly because at this point the organs were not taken out anymore. The focus was more on the visual appearance of mummies, right? And there was maybe some a little bit of like body manipulation from the outside by pouring some liquid resin or whatever that may be. But it's very important to know what mummy you're smelling from what period, and compare that with the technology of mummification of that period, right? Also, yeah, some materials you can really detect,
Mm.
right? So one of the materials that I always smelled is myrrh. It's very clearly there. Another one is juniper tar. That smells very strong. It has this kind of like a meaty scent to it. I think that is why mummies smell a little bit like gourmet. It smells a little bit like barbecued meat,
Mm.
a little bit, and then yeah. I know it sounds a little absurd, but it does smell like that, and you can really smell that on mummies and mummified organs.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what you have access to. I can also tell you that I've smelled a lot of animal mummies and they smell horrendous. They smell really, really bad. So that probably has to do with the fact that animals have thicker skin, or in a case of bird mummies, they have feathers, and the smell stays in there. So probably the same embalming mixtures are used, but they're smellier than us because we have thin skin. And our
I
or
guess the the things that work to prepare a human mummy are not going to be the same for a dog or a cat or a bird,
exactly. A
right?
cat mummy that I smelled was the worst. It was very bad.
Mm.
That was actually the last animal mummy I smelled ever since I haven't asked to smell animal mummy because it was so bad. So I was done at that point.
All right. Well, Dora, thank you so much for answering my questions. That brings me to the end of my discussion. But before we go, you do, as you've mentioned a couple of times, you sort of do your own perfumery based on ancient Egyptian ingredients, recipes that you can translate from temple contexts. First question is, how did you get into that, and what does it actually involve? Are you buying things from ingredients from Egypt, in marketplaces, and then mixing them up based on texts? What is your process there?
Right. So I started this many, many years ago to understand the ancient Egyptian documents better, call it experimental archaeology. So I wanted to know exactly what sensed around the Egyptians. And I started buying my ingredients, right? Most of my ingredients, actually, it's funny, they don't come from Egypt. People assume they do, but it's important to understand that around like 90% of perfume materials in ancient Egypt came from different parts of the world outside of Egypt, because the Egyptians don't really have trees, they don't have resins and fragrant barks and things like that. So aromatics came from either Punt, which is today Somalia and Eritrea, Ethiopia, and the Levant, which is today's Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. So most of the perfume materials came from these two places, right? So actually try to order my ingredients from these places. Yeah, and then I started translating perfume recipes, and then I followed the steps in the perfume recipes, and reconstructed the perfumes.
Mhm. Okay.
So yeah, that's yeah, it's a part of my study because these perfume recipes are very difficult to understand.
Mm.
So the way they're described, you might understand the grammar, you might understand the actual words, but you will not understand what they're describing unless you do it.
Mm.
Right. So that is why I started it. And I found that it's a very effective research tool for me, but it's also a very effective educational tool. It's a
Mm.
great way of learning about ancient Egypt, and you really imagine that you're there. So the scent brings you back.
Mhm. Have you had an opportunity to take it to, schools or anything to give kids an experience of how
Oh, yeah, yeah, all
these
the
work?
time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I teach with it all the time. So I do workshops, um, both in academia and in public spaces. I do a lot of workshops in museums,
Mhm.
but also I'm invited often to conferences to give a lecture and then also give an experimental workshop, and so that people could experience these scents at the conference. So yeah, yeah, it's a very good tool.
Hmm, excellent. And if people want to learn more about the perfumes you make or your research, where can they find you online? Do you have a personal website?
Yeah, so the best way is to just drop me an email and ask to be put in my newsletter. I have a
Mhm.
newsletter where I inform people about my classes and kits. You can also follow me on Instagram. My handle is professor underscore Dora.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then yeah, just take it from there.
Excellent. And I will include links to all of that in the episode description. So if you want to learn more about Dora's work, you can find it there. So, Dora, thank you very much for speaking to us about ancient Egyptian perfumes. I hope you've enjoyed it. And last question, just for the future, what are you working on right now? What's coming up next for you?
So I am currently working on kifi. I'm writing about kifi. Kifi is an ancient Egyptian incense mixture.
Okay,
So that is what I'm currently working on. But it's something else. So ask me next month. It's going to be another perfume.
fair
So,
enough. We can always come back and do more in the
okay.
future.
All right.
Because obviously, I know that since this is your primary research focus, what I've asked you, I'm sure, is just the tip of the scented cone. We could have gone for hours. So hopefully in the future, we'll have an opportunity to do that. But thank you very much. Take care, and we will see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
My thanks to Dora Goldsmith for joining this interview. If you are interested in Dora's work, including academic publications, her Instagram account, and the reconstruction of ancient perfumes, you can find links in the episode description. Dora also sells these reconstructions as individual products, so if you are interested, consider checking them out. Thanks for listening. I'll see you soon.